40 years. 40 years of measuring, chopping, stirring. 40 years of pouring my love, my life, into simmering pots and sizzling pans for them. This pot roast, Rick's favorite since we were newlyweds, slow cooked for 6 hours with carrots, pearl onions, and the bay leaves he pretended not to notice but always ate around. This was meant to be a monument, a testament to endurance, if not passion. I just needed the good gravy boat, the heavy silver one with the ornate handle we received from Aunt Carol, tucked away safely on the top shelf of the walk-in pantry. It only came out for special occasions, and 40 years felt monumentally special, even if the shine had dulled somewhat, much like other things in this house. As I reached for it, balancing precariously on the rickety wooden step stool in the dim, flour-dusted light, smelling the familiar scent of dried beans and yesterday's onions, voices drifted clearly from the dining room, muffled only slightly by the swinging pantry door. My husband's voice. Richard's. "Honestly," he was saying, letting out that dismissive chuckle I knew so well, the one that usually preceded a complaint masked as a joke. "Another 40 years of this? Her cooking is about as bland as her personality." A beat of silence, long enough for my breath to catch in my throat. Then laughter erupted. Sharp, careless laughter that wasn't meant for me to hear but cut me all the same. My children's laughter. Mike and Jess. In that cramped pantry, surrounded by dusty jars of peaches I'd canned last summer and the lingering scent of dried herbs, my heart didn't just break. It felt like it turned to stone, heavy and cold in my chest, settling right beside the lifetime supply of disregarded effort stored there. If you're listening to this story, thank you so much for being here. Let us know where you're joining us from in the world, and don't forget to subscribe to become part of our growing community. My world, for the past 4 decades, had revolved around the kitchen. It was my command center, my laboratory, my stage, and, I slowly realized as I stood frozen in the pantry, my prison cell. Those solid oak cabinets, the ones Rick had proudly installed back in '79, now seemed less like sturdy fixtures and more like bars. The granite countertop I polished obsessively every night felt cold and unyielding beneath my fingertips. My knives, sharpened weekly to a razor edge, gleamed under the track lighting, suddenly looking less like tools and more like potential weapons I never knew how to wield. My days were mapped out by meals. 6:00 a.m. Rise, start the coffee. Rick liked it strong, black, and waiting the moment his feet hit the floor. 6:30 a.m. Prepare his oatmeal, exactly 3 minutes in the microwave, with a sprinkle of brown sugar, never cinnamon. While he ate, reading the newspaper propped against the sugar bowl, ignoring me entirely unless his coffee cup was empty, I'd start packing Mike's lunch. Michael, my 40-year-old son, still expected a packed lunch, usually leftovers from the night before, which he often claimed his coworkers envied, though I suspected they were just being polite. Then came the endless cycle, planning the week's menu based on who might drop by, grocery shopping with coupons clipped and prices compared, prepping vegetables, simmering sauces, baking bread because Jess swore store-bought gave her indigestion, and the cleaning, always the cleaning. The kitchen had to be spotless, ready for the next culinary demand. My cookbooks were my diaries, stacks of them with stained covers and dog-eared pages. The oldest, a Betty Crocker from my own mother, had notes scribbled in the margins in my youthful handwriting, full of optimistic adjustments. Later volumes chronicled phases, the low-fat craze of the '90s, the brief flirtation with vegetarianism when Jess went through a phase in college, the gluten-free experiments for Mike's imaginary sensitivity. Each recipe attempted, each meal served, was an entry chronicling my life as Maggie Sullivan, wife and mother, chief cook, and bottle washer. A role I had slipped into, then seemingly disappeared within. Had I dreamed of other things? Vaguely. There was a set of watercolor paints somewhere in the attic, bought with giddy excitement after seeing a Monet exhibit decades ago. I'd imagined capturing the changing light on the roses in the backyard, but then Mike had needed braces, and Jess started ballet, and the paints dried up, forgotten, along with the woman who had wanted to use them. My world shrank to the four walls of this house, the aisles of the grocery store, the predictable rhythm of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The lack of appreciation hadn't started today. It had been a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone. Rick's initial compliments on my cooking in the early years faded into grunts of approval, then silence. Then eventually, the occasional critique delivered as helpful advice. "A bit heavy on the salt tonight, Mags," or "could have used more gravy." Mike, bless his heart, was a bottomless pit who inhaled food without comment, unless it was to ask what was for dessert before clearing his throat pointedly. He still brought his laundry home every other weekend, expecting it to magically reappear, clean and folded, by Sunday evening. Jess, busy with her own demanding job and social life, treated my home like a convenient catering service, calling last minute to request her favorite casserole for a potluck she'd forgotten about, or critiquing the roast potatoes. "A little soggy this time, Mom?" during her infrequent visits. Thanks were rare. Appreciation was rarer. My efforts were simply expected. Like the sun rising or the taps running water, it was my job, my purpose, or so they had led me to believe. I remembered our 10th anniversary. Rick had surprised me with a delicate silver necklace, a tiny heart. He'd held my hand across the candlelit table, a table I had set, with food I had cooked, and told me my chicken cacciatore was better than anything his mother ever made, which, knowing his mother, was the highest compliment imaginable. We danced in the living room that night to an old Sinatra record, his hand warm on my back. Where had that man gone? Where had we gone? That memory, once sweet, now felt like another betrayal, highlighting the vast, barren distance between then and now. The Rick in the dining room now wasn't just dismissive. He was cruel, casually dissecting my very being along with my cooking. And the children, my children, laughing. That's what truly twisted the knife. Hearing Rick's casual cruelty was one thing. Years of marriage had thickened my skin to his particular brand of thoughtlessness. But hearing Mike and Jess, the babies I had nursed, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose favorite meals I knew by heart, hearing them join in, finding humor in my perceived inadequacy, that was a different kind of wound. It struck at the core of my identity as their mother, the one role I thought I still held, however thanklessly. Standing there in the pantry's dusty silence, the aroma of the pot roast suddenly nauseating, I felt a lifetime of swallowed resentments rise up like bile. 40 years of being the quiet one, the agreeable one, the bland one. 40 years of putting their needs, their wants, their preferences before my own, only to be summarized as flavorless. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, but decisively. A fine hairline crack that spiderwebbed through the foundation of my life. I took a slow, deliberate breath, straightened my shoulders, carefully lifted the heavy silver gravy boat from the shelf, its cool metal a grounding sensation in my trembling hand, wiped a single hot tear from my cheek with the back of my wrist, smudging flour there. I pasted on the serene, slightly vacant smile that had become my shield over the years, the one that meant everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Especially when it wasn't. I pushed through the swinging door and walked back into the dining room, placing the centerpiece, the pot roast, onto the table with a steady hand. "Smells wonderful, Mom," Jess commented, glancing up briefly from her phone. "Yes, looks good," Mike mumbled around a mouthful of bread roll he'd already started on. Rick just nodded, already reaching for the carving knife. I sat down in my usual place, watching them serve themselves, listening to their mundane chatter about work, traffic, the neighbor's annoying dog. The food I had labored over disappeared into their mouths, fueling bodies that housed souls who thought so little of me. The conversation flowed around me, eddying past without touching me as usual. I was a ghost at my own anniversary feast. But tonight, the ghost was angry. Tonight, the ghost was plotting. Later that night, lying rigid in bed beside Rick's oblivious, snoring form, the overheard words played on repeat in my mind. Bland personality. Bland cooking. The injustice of it burned. Decades of careful seasoning, of trying new recipes, of adapting to their shifting tastes, all dismissed. Decades of trying to be a good wife, a supportive mother, of mediating arguments, remembering birthdays, managing a household, all reduced to bland. A terrible, cold clarity settled over me. They didn't see me. They didn't appreciate me. They didn't deserve me. And they certainly didn't deserve my cooking. A new thought, sharp and surprisingly satisfying, pierced through the fog of hurt. If they thought my cooking was bland, perhaps it just needed a little extra kick. Something memorable. Something explosive. The decision wasn't made in anger anymore. It felt like logic, like justice, like the only recipe left to try. As I finally drifted into a troubled sleep, I wasn't dreaming of happy anniversaries past. I was dreaming of grocery lists and unexpected ingredients. When I finally cleared the plates that night, after they had scraped every last bit of pot roast and gravy, Rick had patted his comfortably full stomach, oblivious to the tempest raging silently beside him. "Good solid meal, Maggie," he'd declared, his highest praise these days. Predictable, but solid. Predictable, bland. He had absolutely no idea what was coming. Tomorrow's menu wouldn't be predictable at all. It would be, in its own way, unforgettable. I woke before the alarm, not with the usual weary resignation, but with a strange, brittle energy humming beneath my skin. The house was still dark and quiet, holding its breath before the routine began. I moved through my morning rituals on autopilot, making Rick's coffee, laying out the breakfast things, but my mind was elsewhere, meticulously planning the day's main event. Today's menu: roast chicken with rosemary and garlic, creamy mashed potatoes, sautéed green beans with almonds, and a rich homemade gravy. A classic Sunday dinner. Comfort food. Except today, comfort would come with a cost. My grocery list was precise. The plumpest organic chicken I could find, fresh rosemary sprigs, Maris Piper potatoes perfect for mashing, slender green beans, slivered almonds, and one crucial final item. After selecting the produce with the practiced eye of a seasoned general inspecting troops, I steered my cart towards the pharmacy aisle. It felt illicit, walking past the cough drops and bandages towards the digestive health section. My heart beat a little faster. I scanned the shelves, reading labels with intense focus, ignoring the curious glance from a woman comparing antacids nearby. Powders, pills, liquids. I needed something potent, fast-acting, but most importantly, tasteless and odorless. Ah, there it was. A box of maximum-strength laxative powder, promising gentle overnight relief. Gentle wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but tasteless was key. I considered the dosage instructions. 1 scoop for adults. Rick, with his pronouncements and general lack of appreciation, probably deserved 2 scoops. Mike and Jess, for their complicity and years of taking me for granted could stick with the recommended dose. A small, grim smile played on my lips as I calculated. This wasn't just cooking, it was chemistry. Applied vengeance. I tucked the box discreetly beneath a bunch of kale and paid in cash, avoiding the cashier's eye. Back in the sanctuary, or perhaps the laboratory, of my kitchen, I worked with chilling efficiency. The chicken was rinsed, patted dry, rubbed with olive oil, rosemary, and crushed garlic cloves. Potatoes were peeled and set to boil, green beans trimmed. The familiar rhythm of chopping, stirring, and seasoning usually soothed me, but today it felt different, sharper, more focused. There was no love going into this meal, only meticulous execution and a simmering, righteous anger. When the chicken was roasting, filling the house with a deceptively wholesome aroma, I took out an empty glass spice jar, one that used to hold paprika. I carefully opened the laxative box and tipped the fine white powder into the jar. It looked innocent enough, like cornstarch or powdered sugar. I found a blank, sticky label in the desk drawer and wrote on it in my neatest cursive, "Maggie's Sunshine Spice Blend adds zest. Zest." Oh, it would add zest, all right. I placed the imposter jar prominently on the spice rack, nestled between the oregano and the thyme. As I mashed the potatoes, whipping them with butter and cream until they were fluffy clouds, a momentary pang of something. Guilt? No, perhaps just habit. A lifetime of nurturing instincts warring with this newfound cold purpose. I saw Mike as a little boy, face smeared with mashed potato, beaming up at me. I saw Jess, proudly presenting me with a lopsided clay pot she'd made in art class. Were they truly bad people, or just thoughtless, consumed by their own lives, molded by Rick's example? Did they deserve this particular brand of gastrointestinal justice? The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. Then I remembered the laughter echoing from the dining room, the casual dismissal of my entire existence. Bland. No, this wasn't about them being bad. It was about me being invisible. And I refused to be invisible any longer. This wasn't cruelty. It was a statement. A very loud, very urgent statement delivered via the digestive tract. My resolve hardened again, smooth and cool as the granite countertop. While the chicken rested before carving, I found myself tidying a drawer filled with appliance manuals and old recipes. Tucked at the back was the cream-colored business card Isabella Rossi had pressed into my hand at the church fundraiser last month. Isabella, the celebrity chef with the warm smile and the infectious laugh, had tasted my miniature lemon meringue pies, a recipe I'd tinkered with for years. Her reaction had stunned me. "Maggie!" she had exclaimed, grabbing my arm, her eyes wide with genuine delight. "These are divine! Absolutely divine! The pastry is perfect, the curd is tangy, the meringue is like a cloud. You have a gift, my dear, a real gift. Have you ever thought about doing this professionally?" I had stammered something noncommittal, blushing, overwhelmed by the unexpected praise from someone so accomplished. At the time, it felt like a lovely, fleeting compliment. Now, holding the card, reading her name, Isabella Rossi, Culinary Creations, it felt like something else entirely. A possibility. A lifeline thrown from a world where skill was recognized, where passion wasn't dismissed as bland. I carefully tucked the card into the pocket of my apron, a small, secret weight against my hip. Dinner time approached. I called them to the table, my voice even, betraying nothing. "Dinner's ready!" The scene unfolded with predictable familiarity. Rick grumbled about the football game score. Mike recounted a tedious story about his boss. Jess scrolled through her phone, occasionally offering a monosyllabic response. They were completely oblivious, absorbed in their own orbits. I served the perfectly roasted chicken, the fluffy mashed potatoes, the vibrant green beans, and then the gravy. I poured generously over Rick's, Mike's, and Jess's plates from the main gravy boat, the one laced with the sunshine spice. For myself, I used a small, separate pitcher containing pure, unadulterated gravy. Chicken's good tonight, Mom, Mike mumbled, already halfway through his portion. Yeah, nice and juicy, Jess agreed, actually putting her phone down for a moment. Rick took a large bite, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed. Have to say, Maggie, he conceded, wiping his mouth with a napkin, this gravy has something extra tonight, more flavorful than usual. Did you change the recipe? A tiny smile touched my lips. Just my secret ingredient, dear, I said smoothly. My sunshine spice blend. They finished everything, praising the flavor, unaware of the ticking time bomb they had ingested. I ate my own meal slowly, deliberately, watching them, feeling a strange sense of detachment, of power. I was the puppet master, and they were dancing to my tune, even if they didn't know it yet. The calm before the storm lasted about an hour. We were in the living room, ostensibly watching some police procedural on television. The first rumble came from Mike. He shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, a frown creasing his forehead. Oof. Must have eaten too fast, he muttered, rubbing his stomach. A few minutes later, Rick cleared his throat. A low, ominous sound. He stood up abruptly, his face looking suddenly pale under the lamplight. Think I'll just step out for a moment, he mumbled, making a beeline for the downstairs powder room with uncharacteristic speed. The door clicked shut. Not long after, Jess let out a small, surprised gasp, pressing a hand to her abdomen. Oh, she exclaimed, her eyes widening. Excuse me. She practically sprinted up the stairs towards the main bathroom. The distinct sound of 2 bathroom doors slamming shut within minutes echoed through the suddenly tense silence of the house. Then came the noises. Indistinct at first, then less so. A low groan from downstairs. A muffled exclamation from upstairs. The sound of frantic flushing. Mike was now shifting constantly, his face contorted in discomfort. Okay, something's really not right, he groaned, clutching his stomach and staggering towards the stairs, presumably aiming for the 3rd rarely used bathroom in the guest suite. Another door slammed. 3 bathrooms occupied. 3 family members in sudden, urgent distress. I remained seated in my armchair, calmly turning the page of my gardening magazine. I could hear faint but frantic noises from different parts of the house. A raised voice, possibly Mike, complaining about the lack of something in the guest bathroom. A series of desperate-sounding flushes from downstairs. A distinct, unhappy moan from upstairs. It was a symphony of digestive distress. Rick eventually emerged from the powder room, looking haggard and pale, only to glare suspiciously at the closed door of the upstairs bathroom as another groan emanated from within. He looked utterly bewildered, then glanced towards the kitchen, towards the spice rack. A flicker of dawning, horrified suspicion crossed his face before another wave of urgency sent him retreating back into the powder room. The sunshine blend, it seemed, was working its magic beautifully, adding considerably more zest to their evening than they had bargained for. This, however, was just the appetizer. The main course of my departure was still being prepared. The house finally fell quiet in the wee hours of the morning, not with peace, but with the heavy silence of exhaustion and gastrointestinal defeat. Rick was sprawled on the sofa, pale and weak, occasionally letting out a low moan. Mike and Jess had retreated to their old childhood bedrooms, emerging only for grim-faced trips to their respective bathrooms. The air hung thick with suspicion and unspoken accusations. Jess was the first to voice it, her voice thin and reedy from dehydration when she crept downstairs for water. "Mom," she began, leaning heavily against the kitchen counter, "are you sure there wasn't something off with that spice blend? I've never felt like this." Her eyes, usually bright and dismissive, were now narrowed with distrust. "Me neither," Mike croaked, appearing behind her looking equally wretched. "That wasn't normal, Mom. What was in that stuff?" Rick managed to push himself up slightly from the sofa, his face a mask of weary fury. "Maggie," he demanded, his voice raspy, "stop playing dumb. You did something. I want to know what." I met their gazes, my expression a careful blend of maternal concern and bewildered innocence I had perfected over 40 years. "Goodness me," I said, tutting softly. "It sounds like you all caught a terrible stomach bug. Maybe it was something you ate for lunch. My spice blend is just herbs, dear, all natural. Perhaps you're all just sensitive." I offered them weak tea and dry toast, which they accepted grudgingly, too drained to argue further, though the suspicion in their eyes remained sharp and unsettling. While they languished in their self-inflicted misery, I moved with the quiet purpose of a woman on a mission. The mission? Operation Freedom. First, I went into the small room we called the study, but which mostly served as a dumping ground for junk mail and Rick's old golf trophies. I closed the door firmly. Taking out Isabella Rossi's card, my fingers surprisingly steady, I dialed the number for Culinary Creations. "Isabella Rossi's office. How may I help you?" A cheerful, professional voice answered. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice low but clear. "My name is Maggie Sullivan. I met Mrs. Rossi last month at the St. Jude's fundraiser. She expressed some interest in my baking and suggested I contact her." "Oh, Mr. Sullivan. Yes, I remember Mrs. Rossi mentioning you, the lemon meringue pies, right? She absolutely raved about them." The assistant sounded genuinely enthusiastic. "She said you had magic hands and the soul of a true baker. She actually left instructions that if you called, I should set up a meeting right away. Would you be available to come in and chat with her tomorrow afternoon?" My breath caught. It was real. "Yes," I managed, gripping the phone tighter. "Yes, tomorrow afternoon would be perfect." We confirmed a time. Hanging up, I felt a dizzying surge of hope, so potent it almost felt like fear. This was actually happening. My next call was less pleasant, but equally necessary. I dialed the number for Eleanor Vance, the divorce attorney whose discreet advertisement I'd seen in the back of a local magazine, experienced, empathetic, effective, and tucked away weeks ago, just in case. "Vance and Associates," a calm voice answered. "Yes, hello. My name is Maggie Sullivan. I need to speak with Mrs. Vance about initiating divorce proceedings." I stated it plainly, clinically. No hesitation. Eleanor Vance herself came on the line moments later. Her voice was warm but businesslike. I explained my situation briefly. 40 years of marriage, irreconcilable differences, a desire for a swift and clean separation. I didn't mention the laxatives. Some secrets are best kept in the kitchen. She asked a few pertinent questions about assets, duration of marriage. "Mr. Sullivan," she said finally, "based on what you've told me, this seems straightforward, albeit long overdue for you. Perhaps I can have the initial petition drafted and couriered to you by tomorrow morning for your signature. We can handle the rest from there." "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," I said, feeling another layer of weight lift. Tomorrow morning would be excellent. With the wheels of my new life set in motion, I went upstairs to pack. Not much. Just one suitcase, the large Samsonite that had accompanied us on family vacations years ago. vacations where I'd spent more time planning meals in hotel kitchenettes than sightseeing. I packed my best clothes, the ones usually reserved for weddings or funerals. My few pieces of real jewelry, including the silver necklace Rick had given me for our 10th anniversary. That would fetch a decent price. My watercolor paint box, dusty but intact. My precious, stained cookbooks. And tucked carefully amongst the sweaters, a framed photograph of a much younger Maggie, bright-eyed and smiling, taken just before she walked down the aisle 40 years ago. I hardly recognized her. As I was closing the suitcase, Rick appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. He looked older, diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a mixture of confusion and dawning dread. He saw the packed suitcase on the bed. "Maggie," he rasped, his voice strained. What is this? Where are you going?" The question hung in the air. I looked at him, looked at the suitcase, looked at the life spread out behind me in this house. A flicker of the old fear, the fear of the unknown, of being alone, surfaced. 40 years is a long time to be intertwined with someone, even someone who sees you as bland. Could I really just walk away? Leave everything I knew? The house, the routine, the familiar, suffocating comfort of predictability? But then I heard it again, the phantom echo of laughter from the dining room. I saw Isabella Rossi's encouraging smile. I felt the weight of the lawyer's promise in my pocket. The fear receded, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. The bland woman was gone. The woman standing here now had rediscovered her spice. "I'm leaving, Richard," I said, my voice steady. He stared at me, uncomprehending. "Leaving? Leaving where? Don't be ridiculous. You're upset about the stomach thing. We'll figure it out." "No, Rick," I said softly, closing the latches on the suitcase with a decisive click. "We won't." He started to protest, to argue, but he was too weak, too bewildered. The fight had literally gone out of him. He just watched, his mouth slightly open, as I carried the suitcase to the top of the stairs. The house seemed to hold its breath. Tomorrow morning, the divorce papers would arrive. Tomorrow afternoon, I had a meeting that could change everything. Tonight, for the first time in 40 years, Maggie Sullivan was packing her own bag for her own journey. The air downstairs was still thick with the lingering effects of the sunshine spice, but up here, the air felt suddenly intoxicatingly clear. My bags stood sentinel by the door. The divorce papers waited on the table like a final judgment. 40 years of service were officially over. It was time to step out of the pantry and into the sunlight. The courier arrived promptly at 9 a.m., a young man oblivious to the domestic drama contained within the crisp legal envelope he handed me. I signed for it with a steady hand. Inside were the divorce papers, clean, precise, and utterly final. I didn't even need to read them closely. Eleanor Vance had been thorough. I placed the envelope squarely on the dining room table, right where Rick's placemat usually lay. Beside it, I left a simple, handwritten note on a sheet torn from my recipe notebook. "Breakfast, lunch, and dinner are now self-serve. My final recipe is for your lawyers. Don't look for me. Short, not sweet, and to the point." I called the local taxi service, requesting a pickup in 10 minutes at the end of the block, not right in front of the house. My single suitcase stood by the front door, a silent declaration of intent. I took one last look around the living room. The worn armchair where I'd read stories to the kids, the fireplace mantel crowded with photos of smiling strangers they had become, the faint indentation on the sofa where Rick always sat. 40 years of life echoed in the silence. No regrets. Only relief. I opened the front door, inhaling the cool morning air. Freedom smelled like damp earth and car exhaust. As I stepped onto the porch, pulling the suitcase behind me, the door creaked open wider. Rick stood there, clinging to the doorframe, looking utterly wrecked, but fueled now by a potent mix of panic and fury. He'd clearly seen the envelope on the table. "Maggie," he croaked, his voice hoarse. "What in God's name is this? Divorce? After 40 years? You can't just leave. Where are you going?" His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, but the old entitlement flickered back. Mike and Jess stumbled out behind him, drawn by the commotion, looking equally disheveled and horrified, clutching the papers I'd left. "Mom, you can't be serious!" Jess cried, her voice cracking. "What about us? What about dinner?" The sheer absurdity of her question, even now, struck me as darkly hilarious. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and turned to face them, the three architects of my liberation, looking so lost and pathetic in their suddenly cookless world. "I am going to live my life, Richard," I said, my voice remarkably calm, carrying easily in the quiet morning air, a life where my cooking and my personality are appreciated. "Appreciated?" Rick sputtered, taking a wobbly step forward. You poisoned us. That's what this is about. You admit it. You put something in that food." A slow smile spread across my face. It felt foreign but wonderful. "Poison is such an ugly word, Richard," I replied coolly. "Let's just say I added a little zest to combat the blandness you were complaining about. Seems like it worked, wouldn't you agree?" Woke everyone right up. I met his furious gaze without flinching. "You were right about one thing, though. My cooking did become bland. Because I spent 40 years trying to cater to palates that wouldn't know flavor if it bit them on the tongue. As for my personality," I shook my head, a genuine chuckle escaping me. "You never even bothered to taste it." "But who will cook?" Jess wailed again, the practical reality hitting her harder than the emotional one. "Who will do Mike's laundry?" Mike nodded weakly in agreement. This time, my laughter was full and unrestrained. It echoed in the quiet street, startling a robin on the lawn. "Darling," I said, looking directly at my daughter, "that truly is the least of my concerns right now." I picked up my suitcase handle. It felt surprisingly light. "Oh, and by the way," I added, pausing for dramatic effect, turning back one last time to savor the moment, "I have a meeting this afternoon with Isabella Rossi. You know, the famous chef? She wants to talk to me about a job. Apparently, she thinks this bland old woman has some real talent." The trio stared, their faces a perfect picture of disbelief, outrage, and dawning horror. The image of their stunned, slack-jawed expressions was the most delicious dessert I'd had in decades. I turned my back on them, on the house, on the 40 years of thankless servitude. I walked down the path, pulling my suitcase behind me, the wheels clicking merrily on the pavement. I didn't look back. The taxi was waiting at the corner, a yellow chariot ready to whisk me away to my new, unwritten future. The taxi ride felt surreal. The familiar streets of my neighborhood looked different from this perspective, viewed not as the routes to the grocery store or the dry cleaner, but as the beginning of an escape route. I checked into a small, clean hotel near the city center, a place I'd booked online the night before. My room was simple, impersonal, but it was mine. Entirely mine. No one else's expectations or demands filled the space. I ordered room service for lunch, a club sandwich and iced tea, and ate it slowly, savoring the sheer novelty of having someone else cook for me. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Isabella Rossi's assistant, confirming our meeting location and time for the next day, adding that Isabella was very much looking forward to it. I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. The meeting with Isabella was everything I hadn't dared to hope for. Her office kitchen was a gleaming wonderland of stainless steel and copper pans. She greeted me with a warm hug, her energy infectious. "Maggie, so wonderful to see you. Tell me everything. What have you been baking lately?" We talked for over an hour, not just about recipes, but about life, about passion, about second chances. I found myself opening up, sharing my long dormant dreams, my recent departure. She listened intently, her expression full of understanding and encouragement. She tasted the small batch of spiced pecan shortbread I'd nervously brought along. Her eyes closed in bliss. "Maggie," she said seriously, putting a hand on my arm, "this is artistry. You belong in a kitchen where your talent is celebrated, not tolerated. I'm launching a new online culinary platform focusing on authentic home cooking with a modern twist. I need someone with your skill, your heart, your story. Head recipe developer, what do you say?" Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," I whispered. "Oh, yes." Months have passed since that day. My life now is unrecognizable in the best possible way. I work alongside Isabella, testing recipes, filming short cooking segments, writing blog posts about the stories behind the food. I have my own small, sunny apartment with a tiny balcony where I grow herbs in pots. I'm learning, growing, experimenting. My colleagues respect me, value my input. Isabella has become a dear friend. I even started painting again, setting up a small easel by the window. My watercolors are no longer bland, they are bursting with color. As for the Sullivans, Eleanor Vance handled the divorce efficiently. Rick, facing the prospect of alimony and selling the house he could no longer afford on his own, settled quickly. I heard through the grapevine, Eleanor is discreet but informative, that the house sold, and Rick moved into a small condo across town. He apparently lives on frozen dinners and complains constantly. Mike had to finally learn how to use a washing machine and often resorts to takeout, lamenting the loss of Mom's cooking. The irony is not lost on me. Jess occasionally sends hesitant texts, usually around holidays, asking if I'm okay. I rarely reply. They made their bed. Now they have to lie in it, presumably on an empty stomach. Their absence in my life feels less like a loss and more like gaining breathable air. Sometimes, late at night, after a fulfilling day in the test kitchen, I sit with a glass of wine, looking out at the city lights. I think about that woman trapped in the pantry, heartbroken and invisible. I raise my glass to her pain, which fueled her courage, to her anger, which sharpened her resolve. They called me bland, but they only ever tasted the version of me they allowed themselves to see. Now, the world, and more importantly, I myself, finally gets to savor the real flavor. And it is anything but bland. It is rich, complex, and finally, wonderfully, satisfyingly free. Thank you for joining Maggie on her journey from the pantry to freedom. If her story struck a chord, please hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more tales of resilience and reinvention. Click here for another story you might enjoy. We appreciate you being part of our community. See you next time.